Jim, a very tough time for you and for your franchisees and for the beloved members of Crunch because they're very devoted fans. How are your franchisees coping? Have you had to make offers or, in some way make it convenient for them to, continue on in this environment?
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's a good question. We do have 70 gyms open across 14 states now, so we're starting to see some of the restrictions relax, but more than 250 are still closed, and many of our franchisees have worked hard. They've scratched and clawed their whole life to get to this point, to live the American dream, to be an entrepreneur, and to have government or state closure tell you that you cannot go to work, you cannot provide for your family, you cannot provide for your members. It's been very difficult. With that said, all of our franchisees to date have been able to maintain. Some have been provided, relief through different government sources and so forth, but we haven't closed any clubs related to COVID-19 shutdowns.
Do you imagine that members will come back in the numbers that were part of the clubs before, Jim, or what is your base case for how many you can retain, how many your franchisees can retain? We just heard there that, one boutique investment bank which caters to gyms is expecting $10 billion to come out of an industry that's largely private equity backed.
Yeah, I think his data is about as accurate as all the government data on how many COVID-related deaths we're going to have. It's not accurate. We've surveyed our members. We had over 83% of our members said they would come back on day one. First day open, they would come back to exercise. Of the 70 clubs we've had open, our cancellation rates are at an all-time low, and our sales data is at an all-time high. So we're selling more memberships than we did pre-COVID, and we're canceling less.
So are you saying, Jim, then that the government has exaggerated the danger of the coronavirus?
I believe that if you look at the original data, the data that everybody was sharing early about what the impact might be, and if you look at the current data, and that's not to say to diminish the value of anybody who's passed or been gravely sick due to this. I understand that. I understand it's been a difficult decision for all governments to make, but the data has been completely exaggerated. Cuomo came on yesterday and said all the data was wrong. Everything was wrong. So how do you make decisions if your data is wrong? If I do that in business, I'm going to be out of business.
I mean, I would guess the data is wrong and that it underestimates the amount of people who have contracted coronavirus or the COVID-19 disease, and it underestimates the amount of people who have died of the COVID-19 disease. You're saying you think it goes in the other direction. I'm
saying from what I've read and what I can see that there's a lot of data that's been corrupted. There are even cases wherein they're saying that the death was related to COVID, but there were already pre-existing conditions. There may have been something else that transpired as well medically, but they're relating it to COVID. So how do we know the truth? How do we get to the truth? And why isn't there real data being shared with the citizens of this country and other countries as well? We're all impacted by this. And look, the definition of liberty is the state of being free within society from aggressive restrictions imposed by authority.
Jim,
where is the liberty associated with this?
Jim, how are you planning for the reopening and for a potential second wave? What's your base case in terms of just the financials? Never mind the politics involved or whether some governors decide to reopen and other governors don't reopen. Just balance sheet wise and your investors wise, what are you all planning for?
Yeah, so our worst case scenario, we can still get through late summer into fall with very limited club openings. Once we get into early fall, it becomes a very difficult situation where we would need rescue capital. TPG Growth, our partner since last June, where they purchased Crunch, has already assured us that if in the event we need rescue capital, will be made available. We hope not to get there, and we're encouraged by the productivity of the 70 clubs that have been open. But with that said, we still got over 2/3 of our gyms are closed.
Yeah, and it is heartbreaking to see entrepreneurs, have to think about maybe changing their lifestyles and having to close a franchise that they've been working on for years. We know how much franchisees are always absolutely devoted to their franchises. So would you be open to something like a partnership with other gyms? Or, for example, if another gym were also to need rescue financing, getting together and becoming a bigger outfit?
Yeah, our industry coalition, the International Health and Racket Sports Association, is working on a general fund that would lend to entrepreneurs and health club owners that find themselves in very difficult waters. And that's something that we're trying to help them gain momentum, both politically and in the government offices and so forth. And also, I'm sure we'll help them raise money in the event that becomes necessary. But it is something that the industry is looking at.
Yeah, one of the things I've found perplexing this whole time, Jim, is that the government orders the shutdown of businesses, basically preventing them from raising any kind of revenue, but it doesn't shut down landlords from charging rent. So you've got franchisees that haven't made any money, but they still have to pay their landlords the lease or the rent or whatever. In Japan, I thought it was fascinating. The government there has come out with a program that pays 2/3 of a business's rent if it's affected by the shutdown. Have you heard of any kind of program like that in the U.S.?
No, I'm so glad you brought that up because it's been one of the most difficult aspects. So not only do we franchise 300 plus clubs, but we actually own another 55. So we've been dealing with this on a case-by-case basis with 55 different landlords, many of which have allowed us to defer the rent. They'll get their money in the future, and they've been fantastic. A couple have actually threatened to terminate our leases if we don't pay the rent. Terminate our leases under these conditions. We're making no money at all. We haven't made money in 71 days, and they're threatening to terminate. Others have demanded rent, sent us default notices, and refused to work with us from a deferral standpoint. And what's really irritating is if you defer the rent, the landlord will still get paid. It just won't be in May or June. Just give us some time to get back up, generate revenue, and pay our rents. And we've got several that are refusing to do it. And I believe the government needs to step in and make some considerations for franchisees in all industries. Everybody's under the same pressure here. And I think it's one of the things that people aren't realizing. With 38 million people, go ahead.
Well, no, I was just going to say the landlord's still going to get paid, even though you're never going to make that money back. Again, this is what I haven't understood. You're going to end up owing more after having made less. That leaves the landlord in landlords across the country globally in much better positions than business owners. Do you think the government needs to come up with some sort of grant system?
I think a grant system or just a relief system that says that the landlords are required to work with the tenant on some level of deferral. And I think the deferral period should be at least a year before we have to start paying again. A lot of landlords are giving us a small deferral, say 1 or 2 months, but they're asking for payment upon reopening. It takes months for us to generate revenue to come back. As you can remember, the members have to come back. We have to start billing again. We have to raise ancillary revenues and so forth. So to have a rent payment due plus the rent payment you had deferred, that's a tremendous pressure on the business.